Hi all, this is a quick content warning. This week's episode is focused on issues surrounding birth complications and genetic disorders.
Look how cute my child is with its ridiculously large ears.
Lips like baby.
Yeah, my goodness. Look how furry it is.
Like Dumbo.
Yeah.
Having winged children.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of No Idea Yet. I'm your host Freddie and I'm here with my friends Jonathan.
Hello.
And Alistair.
Hello there.
So, those of you who have been listening since the first episode or have dared listen to the first episode and heard my underwatery voice may remember that I said I'd start off with soft things like hobbies or that I'd follow newspaper articles, which I totally forgot about in the next week. Well,
unheard of in this tangents and no, never heard of
that. Exactly. So this week I'm going down a different route and I'm going to give away absolutely nothing and just see what Johnny and Alistair know. So I hope you're ready. That's the cue so that the music kind of like stops and dies off. I'm thinking editing now. Okay, so guys, with absolutely no warning or idea about what I'm about to say, tell me what you think or who you think a savior sibling is. Anyone want to go first?
I feel like this is that My Sister's Keeper thing.
Is that where someone's born for the purpose to effectively? It's like having a backup kid,
An organ donor thing, right?
Yeah, we need a kidney. Let's just have another kid.
I mean, I haven't actually read My Sister's Keeper, so I know it's a film, and one of them's got cancer, so it's pretty bad. But I cannot elaborate on that.
Is it like, so say if you have a child who's had bone cancer or something like that, or leukemia, and they need a bone marrow transplant, they're super rare to find actual donors for it. And one of the best things is actually somebody who's like blood related, usually either a parent if they're not available. I think some parents specifically have kids with the thought in a couple of years they'll have enough bone marrow to transplant to the other and hopefully save them.
That's pretty close. That's pretty head on.
Or is it your sibling is Jesus?
Well, I was tempted to like put you off on the wrong way and be like, so this may get religious. What is a savior sibling? This is like, it's your sibling who brings you back to the path of God. So you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head there. Alistair, does this fill in a few blanks? What Johnny just said?
I mean, that was my initial thought. But yeah,
okay.
that would. I mean, a sibling that saves another sibling.
Do I get a grade?
Yeah.
Is it like a B? Would it be a B? My answer?
No. I'll explain. So you basically got it. So it's a child that has been conceived in vitro, so that they are a perfect genetic match to an already alive kid who has a very, very fatal, right? Disease. In the idea that when the kid is born, the umbilical cord cells will be used to cure the first child. If the umbilical cord cells fail, they will wait until the kid's a bit older potentially and take blood, bone marrow, yes. Which also has its own dangers because of general anesthetic that you have to be under.
I feel it's almost sadder that you're only doing it just for the umbilical cord. It's like, you don't even care about the child being grown up. I literally, we can throw the baby away as soon as you've got the umbilical cord. Oh, also, you blew my mind by saying very fatal and then, wait, just fatal? Because, yeah, totally. I don't know why it just kind of like blew me away a little bit. I've definitely heard someone say, oh, it's really fatal. But it's like, no, fatal is just fatal.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was like the doctor's like, yes, I diagnose you with death.
Yeah.
Well, yes,
only quite fatal.
Yeah, quite fatal.
Sorry, yeah.
Today we will be talking about savior siblings. I was having a chat with my friendy who has. Oh wait, should we go down that route? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so my friendy who has had problems with organs, and I was suddenly thinking, if you had a kid, so that they were a genetic match, could you then steal their organs and have them as your own?
I think if you use the word steal is probably the operative word in that sentence. It's just
stealing organs in the same sense never a win.
Borrow organs.
So the thing was, I didn't know about it, and so I googled it, and it turns out yes, it's a thing. It's savior siblings. It's been going around. Well, the first case was in 2001, and it does have numerous different risks and numerous different moral and ethical subplots to it. So I thought that'd be a great thing to talk about today. So I will start off my first question. Ooh, which way we should go? I've got a whole list of them. It's so exciting. We'll start off with, is this child exploitation?
I feel if you're planning to have more kids already, and it's a case of, well, we're just going to make sure they're a genetic match first off, then I feel no. But if you're like, well, we're kind of happy with the kids we've got, then definitely yes, because it's kind of, you kind of just, yeah, I can see the benefit of it, but at the same time, it's kind of like that kid will always know it was second best. And like realistically, it's the first kid was the priority, not the second. No, well, no, I mean, that's how I would.
You're the second best. You're going to be the better one. You're going. Who wouldn't want to? Jesus is the savior. The savior is the good one. You know, who wouldn't want to be the savior?
I'm not the ill one. Thank you very much. This guy was so bad. He was just waiting for me to come along.
There are interviews. This has happened where the kids are old enough to talk about it, and I have to say, I feel a lot that it's the media pushing the story that the one kid isn't wanted and the other kid should feel guilty because they can never pay back this debt. But I mean, to be fair, that seems like a big push onto the kids. I mean, if you never
just
even
the negativity and everything being pushed, like you don't need that at all.
You can totally just be like, this is what we needed to do to keep you both alive, right?
Yeah, I think it's because I always remember it was like some TV interview or something about someone whose child died when they were like a baby, like a couple of days old or something. Then they had another child to replace that one. And it was never a case of they wanted another baby for a baby's sake. It was a replacement. So like, oh, we missed Jacob. So then we had like, Thomas. But Thomas is, Jacob was so good. And Thomas never, effectively, it was like Thomas was living in the shadow of this like baby. That was like, oh yeah, Jacob never would have done this. I can't believe you're doing this, Thomas. That's the attitude. And I just felt it was so toxic. So I think part of me, when you're saying that of you having a child just for the other one, it always reminds me of this toxic family that was like, you're giving your kid unrealistic standards for this child that never was. I feel that was just really sad for me. So I think if I think of it in that frame, then yes, child exploitation. But the other side, most time, it's like adoption. Some people get really, it depends how people take it. Some adoptions like, yeah, they adopted me and they're my parents. That's it. Don't need to know the other ones. They gave me up for adoption, so that's their prerogative. Other people, it's a big thing and it's like a big crisis. I think it affects everyone different, doesn't it?
Well, this is an interesting point. You're saying kind of the replacement, because it has happened where the treatment that they obviously use the cells from the first baby has failed and the original first child died. So is the second kid, the kid's not a replacement as per se, it's just, it's not at all the kid's fault. Any of this it's never a child's fault, anything. The child can't be at fault ever, really, because it's the parents or the parents' upbringing that's caused whatever happened, right?
You don't hear the story about the savior who didn't manage to save anyone. That's a sad story. So yeah, would you tell the kid that and then be like, oh, you had this older brother, older sibling, whoever, and then this happened, because obviously then if it's that sad of a story, if it ends with the kid dying and then the savior, as it were, not being a savior, obviously, you're still a light in your parents' life, ideally, and all that good stuff, but yeah, obviously it doesn't make for quite such a good story. It's the savior.
I think it just depends on the parents, doesn't it? Because I get some parents would be like, we lost a first, unfortunately, but we got you, and we've got you, and that's like the greatest gift. Like it was horrible that what happened, but effectively saying like, at least we've got one kid. Like you're putting the effort in. Or the other way, if you had parents who were so like stoked on the first one, they'd be like, you failed. You were meant to do this and you didn't. You failed at your job, and now you're forever a disappointment. So I think it really depends on the parents being like, you're the light of our life because we lost one child, but at least we've got one. Or it's kind of we're meant to have him, and then because of you, isn't alive.
Yeah.
Okay. Could be she.
Okay, so down to just to finish that question is that we're going to see that the psychological bearing on the child when they're older, both of them, is generally down to the parents. And I really don't understand why some of these parents went to the newspapers because the They get hounded. The kids get hounded like, you owe your sister your life. And the kid's like, yes, I know.
Leave me alone.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question. This comes under designer babies because the second child has to be had in vitro to make sure that they are a perfect genetic match. This is going down the steps of designer babies where we choose the genetic traits of our children before they are born. Thoughts, guys, on how you feel about that?
I think that it's quite a deep dive into the rabbit hole of it, but I think the sort of inevitable gap widening between the rich and the poor when that becomes more common and more prevalent in society, because obviously if you're rich and you can therefore afford genetically superior kids, then you're then having, that's only going to widen the gap between the rich and the poor, which is obviously at the moment ridiculously big, but not like a physical manifestation of it in that same way.
So they get pudgy rich kids. What are you trying to say?
Oh, I'm saying rich kids at the moment are rich, and obviously they've got those privileges and everything, but they don't actually have. They're not genetically superior. But obviously, if they actually were, then it would be like, oh shit, that opens up a whole kind of worms.
One thing which would be really funny with genetically engineered kids is that you assume that, right, when you have a certain type of muscle mass, you certain kind of height, but then obviously I sell kitchens, bathrooms and bedrooms. Stuff goes through phases of fashion for about 5 years, things. Same with dogs. Dogs are a fashion accessory to some points. And like it would happen with kids that, it's all the rage to have kids who are going to be blonde hair and blue eyes. And then suddenly 5 years later, it's like, oh no, it's brown hair and brown eyes. And you get these weird like age ranges of where you look a certain way. And it's because in the 70s when everyone had green toilets, and so it was all the rage then, but everyone hates it now. So do you think we get some people in the 40s who are like, oh, you look so ugly, why did everyone think that was pretty? Like, because that's how like stuff changes. And I always remember a reason of why you have fashion trends with anything is effectively for rich people to be able to prove that they're rich. If everyone keeps the same furniture for 20 years, how do you know that you earn £1 million when somebody else earns not £1 million? And so you're able to afford things, and then you want to have fashions changing because then you can proving that you're still rich. But yeah, so I imagine that happened with babies too.
Well, imagine
people... You've really, really hit the designer part of the designer babies on there.
Oh yeah, I was thinking,
really gone ham on the designer
appearances and not having a smart kid or like anything else. Just I want my kid to be beautiful. I don't really care what else.
Well, I was just picturing as you said that, like designing the kid to look like Snapchat filters or those Instagram filters that are extreme. Big eyes, incredibly narrow nose, or that weird kind of your head's too small, or your neck's shrunk, or your hips are in a funny thing. Imagine if you could design them like that, so it's kind of permanent. You're like, hey.
Yeah.
We can't change your bone structure anymore. They changed it when you were a kid, and now you have ridiculous hips.
Oh, okay. So the next question I'm coming on to, I've got a few here. We'll go with, what if the child was had so that the donated part of them goes to a parent? Does that make it worse or not change it? If the kid has so the parent can have another kidney or something.
Is that like farming technically? Like you're growing something to perhaps for yourself?
It's a bit more like, yeah.
I
think that is when you have to draw the line between like that. If you follow that like argument through to its reasonable conclusion, then you'd say, oh well, that means a parent can do whatever they want with their kid, kind of thing, and that's obviously not the case, because you've got to give that human autonomy, and which you're kind of taking away, I guess, in a bit. If you, I don't know, like obviously you can survive with one kidney, but
yeah, it's quality. It goes into quality.
By the way, we only ever had you because we wanted to take your kidney now. Pretty brutal to hear when you're 15 years old, I'd imagine. So,
okay, but let's imagine that you do want to have a kid anyway, and they have a child, and they grow up, and what I'm getting at here is that you can be more likely to have certain diseases, right? There's genetic, what do you call it, when you're more likely to have some disposition.
Yeah.
So let's say you had a kid as an insurance policy. Alistair, would you not donate a kidney or part of your liver to your mum or dad?
Sure. I mean, that's a long insurance policy. I mean, I guess they mostly are, but I'm going to wait till my kid's like in his 20s before he's going to go. I don't know. Like, if you did have that as a genuine worry, I think there's probably better ways to deal with that, like a real insurance policy. Or
I like the idea
Yeah.
of that. You're like, oh, so who's your insurance with? Like, oh, mine's Aviva. What about yours? Oh, my kid. If I lose a leg, I'm taking theirs. They're more or less my clone.
I mean, to be fair, you just when we think in terms of culturally, it's quite a Western thing that we don't really have that kind of
This
a
was
lot of
where I was going.
culture. It's very much like you have your kids, and then they with the sort of either they're going to take care of you in your old age, which I think is a less of a thing in the West. It's more like, oh yeah, we'll take what we can and then just run for the hills. But yeah, no, definitely there is that element of you have kids because it's carrying your bloodline and all that sort of thing. But it's also as a way of it is like an insurance policy for your kind of old age, so that they'll do something.
Exactly where I was trying to push you towards, piece by piece. That first, oh, would you have a kid to donate to you? Oh, second, what if it was for in the long run? And then to show that actually people do this. I had a conversation with Johnny about this. What happens?
I was going to say, as Johnny, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, obviously, as the only father amongst the three of us. So,
I mean,
what is
a fun thing? I think I've already said previously of Abby's dad worked with somebody, and he's like, "Oh, what's your talk about pensions or something? So what's your pension?" He's like, "Oh, I don't pay into a pension." Like, how? Why do you not? So I've got 17 kids. They're my pension, and it's I think he was Indian. I can't remember. I don't know. Say whatever. But yeah, so that is that thing of. I guess as well. Do you know saying you're having a kid to replace a part? Oh, your kidney's failing. I have an insurance policy of a kid. I mean, that's taking it as very. If you think about it, all kids are technically to replace you at the end of the day. And it's just whether or not because they're replacing your lineage, so to speak. You're passing on your genes. You're replacing
genes and everything.
Yeah, so you're kind of saying your mark in the world you'll die eventually, but you'll replace your mark with your progeny effectively. So it's the thing of, oh, my leg doesn't work anymore. Well, your kid's going to be able to do what you're not able to do anymore. That's just kind of being a parent. Yet the other thing is being so selfish that no, actually, I don't want you to reap the benefits of me giving you everything. I'm going to take it from you because I have a right, I guess. Some people feel entitled that because they came from you that you own them. I don't know.
So, quick challenge, if you don't mind, actually, quite a funny thing that happened not too long ago. So it was before this current lockdown we're in now. I was down the snooker club playing some snooker with my dad, and then on this other table there was this dad with his son, and the son was probably about 10 years old, and I've seen him done quite a few times before actually, and it's very much like the dad's really living his lifelong dreams of being a good snooker player through this kid. Clearly, this kid's amazing, and he's super young, the kind of age you need to get a kid that serious about sport if he wants to make it as a professional one day, and obviously it's quite the kid does look like he enjoyed it. There is not that's forcing it on him, but there's this really funny conversation between the two of them where the dad was basically bribing the kid to stay and do some more games, and he's bribing him with Minecraft money. He's like, "Oh, I'll give you 20 quid for this game," and the kid was like, "Oh no," and then I think the kid once was, "Oh, you're gonna give me 20 quid then, Dad?" And his dad was like, "Oh, I'll give you 10 quid, but we can spend it on Minecraft because your mum won't let you spend money on Minecraft." And this whole bizarre, me and my dad was just laughing away. This whole completely bizarre. But what do you think there's a moral question there about forcing your kid into a sport just because you want to do it, or would that kid be like, "Oh no, I had the chance to do that thing with my dad and I really enjoyed it and everything"? And obviously, if that kid does then go on to become a professional and a successful one, would he then be like, "Oh, I attribute all the success to my dad who pushed me in the right direction"? I think that's a really interesting thing,
because it's you can't get to the professional league unless you start when you're because you have to start on go-karts when you're 4. I remember the thing that they're trying to get F1 more accessible for people because effectively you have to be wealthy to be an F1 because it means you're weekend. You have to have a big trailer for your go-kart when you're 4 years old. You have to be able to have disposable funds to travel up and down the UK competing. Then you go from go-karts to cars and then you slowly go up, but you just need wealth for it. And that's not really, and I know they're trying to do things effectively to be able to get kids into it who aren't from those typical wealthy backgrounds. Maybe there's funds towards get go-karts to start off, things like that. But yeah, it's funny to really get into professional sports, you have to start when you're 4 years old and then just get hammered into you.
Back to the parents, it's all about parents, isn't it? And there are situations. I mean, I saw this great show about genius kids or kids getting into Mensa or something, and it was basically these really, really hard tests that kids would do to get into this highly esteemed academic situation, academic
institution.
Institution.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys saw this, there was a clear divide where there were some kids that were just brilliant. They were just naturally brilliant. And the parents were like, yeah, he just picked up books and started reading like by himself from like age 1, and we couldn't stop him, like he'd read anything, so we just got him more stuff and he learned more. And the kids have that raw energy and hunger. And then there's those other kids that are pushed, and we're talking like extreme levels of being pushed. Yes, they're brilliant in comparison to their own age group, but they just want to be normal kids in the sense that they want to have lots of interests, not necessarily one. And so there are sports where some people have become the best because they wanted to their whole time, but there are also being pushed.
But I think all kids. I guess I remember chatting to a BT guy who came up to the internet, or was it Sky? And he's saying that he really likes track cycling, and he's getting his kids into it as well. But he said it's really hard when they get to teenagers because they just want to play with the mates on a Saturday, or they want to get a job on a Saturday. But it's like, no, you'd have to be training, and it's like, I think in any element of sport, you do have to be pushed to be a professional. Only because I think in football, same, but I don't know.
I have a counter example.
Yeah, but I think it's hard because some sports of like a kid just would never get into it if it wasn't for the parents pushing them into it. You know what I mean?
Okay, what about
how they would.
I think I'm correct in saying this. Usain Bolt just wanted to beat his brother. He wanted to be faster than his brother or something, so he pushed himself and became what he has become. He wasn't pushed by his parents.
I guess
the barrier to entry for running and the barrier to entry for like F1, like Johnny said, is slightly different.
I was thinking maybe it's actually just like
I sat in my bath every day with a dinner plate trying to practice these terms. Like, that's what.
Maybe that's it. It's actually equipment. Do you like if you're thinking of like tennis? That's, to be honest, it's not too hard to get that kind of equipment. But something like cycling, it's like no, to get a proper bicycle it is expensive, and as a kid you need to keep
have a full-size tennis court in their back garden.
But like with cycling, you have to keep getting it as kids grow older, and they cost a lot each time. For instance, whereas tennis, if you have a local tennis court, for instance, or in your back garden, I mean, you can be rich and be very good at tennis.
Well, I think anything that has an element of being against other people directly, like they affect you, kind of like tennis, requires having maybe like a sibling or someone around you with similar skill to push against, which generally comes in the form of joining a local team, right? But something like running and potentially cycling, you can just get better by yourself. Although there is tactics in cycling, I know that.
So Johnny, but it's again, like, sorry to single you out as, like I say, obviously you're one of the three of us who's got a kid, but are you planning on any of this sort of thing with Ezra to, like, get him into some sports? Or what? I mean, has he shown any attributions at one?
So this is more of like an anecdotal, like being a parent thing of just, I got an Xbox in the last year of primary school, and I think I got a phone like as a hand-me-down as I went into high school, like a mobile phone. And now Ezra being 16 months old, so grandparents around, I had an grandparent, he was on an iPad, he was doing something on his iPad, and then Ezra came along, pressed the home button, went into the folder which has YouTube Kids, then clicked on the app for YouTube Kids, then he presses play, and then he'll keep swiping along the videos when he gets bored and presses a new one. And that's like, it's just mad of like, that took us so long to learn, and he's 16 months and can do that. Also makes me worried because already you've got a short attention span, because he knows that he can keep, like, he'll look at the videos, see what he likes, then press it, and then he'll keep doing that. And it's like, all right,
okay. You're going to show my ignorance of like kids that age, because like I said, the youngest because I taught when I was like teaching was older than that. But like, what age do they like? Is he like talking and stuff? Like, what's his actual?
I think kids vary.
16 months,
at the age of 2, kids vary with, like, so Ezra walks really proficiently, whereas a kid the same age as him only crawls at the moment. But I think he's already started words more advanced than Ezra, for instance. So it's really kind of like I think by the age of 2, most kids have usually got down walking and talking, at least to like some basic level. So yeah, so Ezra doesn't talk at the moment, just makes, he jabbers a lot, and he understands words, so you can be like, go take this to mama, and then he'll go and do it, or like, oh, where are the doggies, or like, who's that? So he understands more than he can. But I did like Freddie always saying
that's normal, isn't it? Because of like mouth and vocal formation, they understand way, right? But they can't enunciate.
Yeah, and do you like because this is from Freddie, the fact I like to tell a lot of people, which is from Freddie, about it's hard to use your tongue to make noises, and then baby sign language. but it just hasn't been an issue. You kind of just know what he wants and usually have a routine. So it's kind of like, yeah.
Well, that comes from being around someone, right? I mean, if you live with someone, it doesn't matter who they are or what even other languages they speak. It's pretty quick. You could probably grunt at them and they'll know what you mean. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to do baby sign language, but then it just didn't seem it ended up being that useful, to be honest. It was just kind of like, oh, he gets milk at this time, and he kind of like if he fusses, you kind of know. Yeah, babies have different cries, which is funny.
Obviously,
Tangent over.
We kind of have to go back to the original question. Annoy people. Last point, before I ask you your questions to go and research, has got to be, would you do it? Would you have a second child, potentially to save the first?
I thought you were going back to designer babies, and then I thought of like, it would be such an argument with your other half to be what attributes they get from each parent, because assuming to design would still have to be. You're like, well, I want them to have my eyes and your nose, and be like, no, I don't want that at all. Imagine the arguments you'd have with your partner to be like, well, I just think that I've got all the good attributes. Can I just make a mini clone? No, it's meant to be our baby. I can't imagine some like really high intensity kind of like argument.
What if you have the first one and the second one you get to have is your clone? Then you get to have a clone.
clones around. I was going to clone the dog. And you build
the third one, we'll just have lucky dip.
We'll have it all natural, and he or she will hate
he will hate his siblings that are superior.
Well, then it turns out actually that the mixture would be superior and have superior immune system and stuff, actually, wouldn't they? So you'd kind of.
It'd be like the first two kids are pedigree, and the third one's a mutt.
Yeah, but the first one's like inbred, technically.
Yeah.
Your genetic.
Well, actually, we didn't use any of.
I'm glad we got such a solid foundation of the genetics.
Well, can you please answer my question?
Yeah. To answer your question, Freddie, I feel like is a line right? Is between you don't have that kid for one reason and one reason only of that. I think that's a bit much. So I probably wouldn't have a second kid just with the intention of saving the first one, and then. But I feel like I'd quite like to have more than one kid anyway. So yeah, but
okay. I mean, it's a win-win if you want to have the kid.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to have a second kid, absolutely.
You'd have to consider about the genetic side of it. But yeah, I think if that was the case, it'd be like, well, we want another kid anyway. The difference is now it's got to be in vitro fertilization in a certain way. Heavily consider it because it just seems like a why not.
Yeah, if you're going to do it anyway, exactly, and then it'd be like, because if then in a few years down the line you'd be like, okay, well then if the other kid didn't, the first kid like died or whatever, and you'd be like, oh well, why we had this opportunity. It's like I said, when life gives you opportunities, I think you've got to kind of.
But if you've got like 4 kids already, and you're like, 5 of my kids, we got 2 kids and then twins.
Yeah. It's a hard point to make, obviously, especially not having to do it ourselves. But I mean, the big part of it is that the first kid will die. That's the whole point, is that they will die if you don't do this.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple that tried to have the in vitro second child 6 times, and it never succeeded. Like they had 1 or 2 miscarriages, and the rest never even adhered to the inside of the uterus. God, my biology's crap right now. And there has been cases where the second baby born was not a perfect match, and so then the umbilical cells were worthless.
I've heard of a similar thing, but it wasn't with genetically done. It was a case of having a third kid to see if it. So they had a first child, which was just kind of no issues at all. Second child, super rare disease, which is only because 2 parents were carriers, and it's again really. It was like super rare just to have 2 people that had the carrier genes in them, and let alone for them to have a kid. And I think it's like a 1 in 10% chance your kid would have this issue. It was like kind of full electric wheelchair from the get-go, and it costs. It also, you learn about having severely disabled children, how expensive it is. You got to get modified vans, these huge electrical wheelchairs, which cost a fortune, and then just care and stuff like this. Had the third child in the hopes that the first child's like bone marrow wasn't accessible for them. Had a third child to see if they would be able to like have bone marrow, and it had the same condition. So they end up having 2 severely disabled kids who cost a fortune. And it's like, oh man, could you imagine? It's like, oh, the third was to help the second, and the third ended up being like the second as the risk that they took. And just
Yeah, I don't even know where to go with that. Really, that's. I
That's
mean,
all
sure
right.
they would have known that was quite likely, I guess. But
Well, I mean, the point is that you can screen a zygote or an embryo before if you were doing IVF, hence why you could do it. So you could check that the kid doesn't have something. This is something that I am kind of, I'm a backer of. I mean, I've worked with disabled kids. I might obviously talk to you guys about this. I worked in a disabled school, and there are parents that I've spoken to who understand that, if you could choose not to have a disabled kid and choose to have a healthy kid instead, sometimes that could be a better option for everyone. I mean, you can't cry over everyone who doesn't exist, right? So
well, yeah, I think that then gets into the obviously like pro-life, pro-choice kind of movement and all that sort of thing. Which
eugenics.
I think we're all quite pro-choice. But yeah, no one would ever pick disabled kid, right? I mean, I don't think so.
Wouldn't the mindset become that obviously you designed it because if you don't, there's a chance they could be disabled? I mean, they never would spit on someone who dares to risk playing with the dice of fate could have a disabled child. How dare you put that on them?
Yeah, that's true. I guess my always thought was
so the cultural implications of that are quite interesting, I think. But yeah, no one would ever pick disabled kid, right? I mean, I don't think so.
Wouldn't the mindset become that obviously you designed it because if you don't, there's a chance they could be disabled? I mean, they never would spit on someone who dares to risk playing with the dice of fate could have a disabled child. How dare you put that on them?
Yeah, that's true. I guess my always thought was
so the cultural implications of that are quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean,
so pretty liberal.
I always think it's a case of like it's making decisions for how can you choose a huge decision for somebody when you're not that person, especially if you're some random old white male.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it all comes back, especially this point, is that at what point is it the parent making the choice versus the unborn child's non-decision, right?
Literally, I want to say life or pro-choice, right? So
yeah,
I think,
I guess I'm
thinking everything you have a kid, you just pick like they're for whatever reason in this hypothetical world that is the case.
I'll probably for the design side is like you 100% guarantee you're not going to have a disabled kid, but they'll be completely random. Then I'll be fully on board with that. But it's more of a case of any further design to be like, we're going to this little gene you have, we're going to enhance it more than you ever would have been able to, so they are better at this or that. I feel like to use the term you kind of playing God kind of thing. Not that's a particular issue, but for me personally, I just feel like I like that kind of you don't know what you're getting. So definitely no chance of disability. Winner, chicken dinner. But then anything for that, I prefer to have random, just because.
God, you made me think something crazy now. Right? How about flip this on its head?
Only disabled kids.
Yes. No. Yes. Like think about back in cultures where being really, really fat and gluttonous was fashionable because you didn't have to do anything. You could just eat all day. People have their super long nails because they don't have to do anything for themselves. Imagine it becomes fashionable to show how wealthy you are by having disabled children.
Oh, that fully would be a thing. Yeah.
That then just feels so like that dystopian.
That's the thing. Some design where it becomes the kid is suddenly a fashion accessory. Like look at my child.
But to be fair, what you just said about like we have been breeding dogs to be disabled for a very long time because we think it's cute, because we think it's
Why? So to end this half, I'm going to be asking you to go away and look into knowledgeify us all on designer babies and potential choices in the future. One thing that could be wiped out immediately, for example, is cystic fibrosis, I believe. If you just screened for it, I mean, you could actually use CRISPR to just cut that gene out. The same child is born, they just don't have cystic fibrosis. But we're not allowed to do that.
So shout out to everyone listening to this in 2036 and
It's always a case. It's not because of the initial. It's always the slope, the slippery slope, which leads to having winged children.
Yeah. So I just want you to.
Seems like a win-win, to be honest. If you wing kids and no cystic fibrosis, quids in.
But they can have wings, but they still have to have the cystic fibrosis. That's the problem.
Yeah.
But so my question is not a specific question to either of you. Just I'd like you to go look up genetic modification in the future, potentially, how slippery this slope might be, because potentially it's not as slippery as you think, and maybe where you'd draw the line. I'll see you guys in the next half, and just over to our sponsor.
Hey listeners, if you've made it this far and you have anything, maybe a product, another podcast, a charity that you'd like us to pop into our halftime interlude, please let us know at noideayetpodcast@gmail.com.
Hello, and welcome back to the second half. It's been a week now, and we've all gone away and had a little look at some of the topics that we talked about, and we're going to find out what Johnny and Alistair have found out. Yeah, I can say find twice. So, who would like to go first with their findings on designer babies?
I'll set the ball rolling if you like. So
Yeah.
the questions I believe were, so basically designer babies was a big part of it, right? Did a bit of research on that, which comes into Save Your Siblings. There was a nice little story I read about, which is this. I say read about. Obviously, I watched a video on YouTube, as you do, as is a lot of research these days. So this mother, Amy, had a son called Jivan, which means life apparently, and he had this disease basically, which was life threatening. They did the whole Save Your Sibling thing. Went through with it, and it worked. Basically, when it works, obviously, it's a really, really lovely story. You can't really beat it as a story. So they had this little daughter, Jar, which means victorious. So she'd be victorious in saving her brother's life and everything. And yeah, it was just a very nice little. If you had any doubts about it, you'd be like, well, that was really lovely. Obviously, the flip side of that is if it didn't work, it would be like, yes, not so lovely. But yeah,
was the story told in like a positive way, right? Like, I mean, again, we talked about how the media spins it. It was told positively, right?
It was very much, yeah. It was this is a good thing because this worked in this way. See, when you're looking at does the end justify the means? It's when the end is that nice, and of course it does. You see these two kids, and like I said, I think they touched on quite a lot of the stuff we touched on originally. That obviously, if you're going to have another kid anyway, it's a complete no-brainer. Obviously, the IVF stuff is a sort of it's a detour rather than some sort of massive speed bump, I think. But yeah, it was a very nice little bit.
That's really cute.
Just a tangent. Or just from that, it's funny thinking of do you know the idea of that you're wanting to save a life by having two lives to continue on two lives, and it's the thought of it's not because of the outcome of what that baby's going to become. It's like what they're going to become a dictator, and then it's all bad. It's like that one fuzzy feeling goes when they're Hitler. But that's not the point, is it? It's not about what the child's going to become. It's just that it's life in its just purest form of it doesn't matter. It's not for the outcome other than just that it continues on. Quite a cool thought. So we'll be looking up designer babies. Adam Nask was the first one, technically in 2000. And when I say designer babies, it's less of designing, more of choosing. So if you're doing IVF, it's a case of you have 6 embryos and then you screen them for genetic traits and then you choose which one. So it's more of it's not like you're designing, but you're kind of choosing, if you know what I mean. And looking into it, they said the ideas of the cliche, design a baby means you're choosing athleticism or intelligence, but just saying you can't really find it in DNA. It's just too complex to know actually what is a gene which corresponds with intelligence and athleticism. So they're kind of reading this article was kind of saying that in our lifetime we'd never be able to find out. It's just way too complex. We're just not at that level yet. And I guess kind of so why worry about it? But the argument against it would be for the bigger picture rather than the now. So it's 100 years in the future, are we going to be the things we set up now will have that knock-on effect? Yeah, and other things for going into CRISPR and changing genetics is that as you change something in your DNA, it has a knock-on effect. I think they tried doing something with HIV and they ended up being more susceptible to something else, for instance. So it's kind of when you start trying to do one thing, it's usually one effect will have a knock-on. Oh yeah, that's one thing of say if they're there is no possible way of knowing if you're going to have a more intelligent or a more athletic baby, you can bet that companies would take advantage and say, well, look, we can actually assure you're going to have a more athletic and beautiful baby, and they're just going on the basis that you hope enough people have positive reviews that you can just keep blagging it, just like conning people. So I was like, I bet that'll be something.
Market it,
yeah, market things and be like, that's all a hoax. It's just a con. He said, yeah, but it seems like it worked for so and so. So why should I not do it? And it's like, yeah, just one of those things of, and then. Yeah, and I think in the end, it may just be more like you're picking stats for a character. So it's not that you got, oh, these are the eggs, these are the stats your baby's going to have. Which one do you choose? So it's not that you're designing in those things, more of a case of you're getting to choose out of a bunch.
Well, that's nature over nurture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you make choices with your kid. One quick thing on that, Johnny, you just reminded me that I read today, actually, which is quite funny. It was about like, when people talk about, this is a very quick tangent, and we'll straight back to what we were talking about. But it was about like the classic thing of, you wouldn't want to time travel because one little tiny thing in the past could change the future, right, dramatically. And everyone talks about that. No one ever talks about doing one dramatic thing in the present and having that dramatically change the future. Because it's exactly the same principle, right? So, but yeah, like you said, the butterfly effect, but just starting now instead of in the past. But it's very interesting. But anyway, I really agree. The bigger picture versus sort of the more kind of individualistic like take on it was
so
quite
like,
clear dividing.
The ethics of future, and it's kind of like now they're like, oh cool, we can do whatever because it's not even an eventuality. It's like it's impossible on a lifeline, but it's like but what happens when it becomes? So one of the things for later is this is on genetic modification, but I'll say it anyway. It's probably an issue in a few decades, not now. And it's a case of, do you have some things on the table? The longer it's on the table, the more it's normalized. And so you have this thing of like, we can genetically modify a baby to do this, or like CRISPR and stuff. It's like, no, we're not allowed to do that. Nope, that's just ethically wrong. But the longer it's available and it's just there, the more people are like, no, kind of, it's okay, well, we did this and it's not too bad. So like, even something that's taboo, the longer it's just in, if you hide something, or like it's not even on the table, it's forgotten about or whatever, or it's like, sometimes I think the longer something goes on for and it's known about, the more likely people are to be okay with it, just because they're like, I've known it all life. Is it that bad? You know what I mean?
Wow, you made me think, I mean, this is a complete tangent from all of this, but
Sorry.
It made me think about the taboo thing, just like taboo thing. So like if something's known about and talked about in and out, eventually, it wears you down and you kind of like, not wears you down, but you get used to it.
Yeah.
So then you're more open to it. So I'm wondering if there's something like that and other parts of society, maybe those with different genders or those who feel certain ways about things that like we are getting used to, but maybe because they're taboo and people don't talk about them, when we bring it up, and then our parents might be like, yeah, we did, that actually happened like 30, 40, 50 years ago, but we're like, no, it's new, it's cutting edge. It's just like, no, people have been around like that for ages, you just don't talk about it. But if you do talk about it, it gets very normalized, like you said. And that's not at all what I was going to talk about either. Do you mind if I ask you about a few things? You mentioned a couple. One that I find really interesting is that you said about choosing the embryo, right? That you're choosing one. It's not actually modifying necessarily.
It's a screening thing,
This is the difference between the kind of CRISPR where you modify it physically. You're like, right, I'm cutting out this section of the DNA and inputting a more regular section. So this is the actual part that Muslims have the problem with. It's the embryos have souls in their belief, and so that's the problem, is that you're throwing away the other embryos. How do you guys feel about that?
I always think this for like anything with pro-life and choice, of like, or any idea of stem cells or like taking it from embryos. With IVF, I know you have about 6 eggs. They'll try a few, and I think either they're frozen or chucked away. You freeze them for later use, or they're just thrown away. And it's kind of like, it's funny because if you ever want to do IVF and you've got any issues of that kind of, if a life starts in the embryo, then you're automatically throwing 6 potential lives away, and even ones that could have been successful. So I think it's a thing that people don't think about, of like, especially with anything like, some people don't like morning after pills because it's like, or whatever. But somebody may then have IVF, and you do realize that you're also throwing potential lives away in that person's viewpoint.
Yeah, I think, again, it's everyone's entitled to their own beliefs, and they can, but I do think the further you go down this kind of road, the more these kind of, especially ancient religions, become They just have a less sway, I think, in terms of, because it's not, they weren't designed for this, were they really? Although I appreciate that, you know, the ethics and the morals surrounding it, you can apply them, but I think they're so far removed from where they started now that it's getting into difficult territory. But yeah, I think this could be a big rabbit hole. We could be diving down here as well.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, like for me, I always think unless you have time travel, everything's already happened, and everything's kind of set in stone. And I always think like the matrix of being like, it's not about, you know, when he knocks over the thing, and it's not about like what you do. It's about learning of why you do the things that you do, if you know what I mean. So it's like, well, did you not have a choice to do that? No, but you did. But you probably make the same decision over and over again because you wanted to do it in that time. So it's not about the decisions you make, it's why you make the decisions that you do.
Well, the part that you're saying about how these things, how these religions, like, I mean, they still apply their beliefs to how we feel, and that's a bad way of explaining it. Like, the beliefs are more about the core belief, the core values that you hold, and then you apply that to modern techniques and modern situations with this technology. So, I mean, Muslims agree that saving life or making life better is a good thing. It's just the embryos being thrown away is what they don't like. Christianity, I found, I don't know if you guys want to talk about this more or not, but they said that they are all up for this, like thumbs up, unless a superior human race is created, that's a thumbs down, and no clones. Which I just can't believe that the Pope actually mentioned that this should not be used to make clones. This is apparently
the world we live in, guys. The world we live in.
I mean, like, yeah, I think the biggest thing with any kind of religion is usually murder is a big no-no, and then the same with just general, you know, culture as it is. I think now with anything secular, it's easy to have that. Well, it's not life because it's just a bunch of cells. I guess we're all a bunch of cells, really. You know, and then the thing you're saying, like anything like, you know, older religions, is they're not built for this kind of thing. But what really, it can even be like an ethical thing, regardless if you're religious or not. It's about determining when life is valuable and when it is not, and, you know, and when life starts. You know, because if it's got the potential of life, don't matter if religion, they're like, it's whether or not you class it as murder to kill potential life that could be a human. Because it's like, well, when do you stop from a bunch of cells to a baby being born, of when that's a life that you're killing? I think the biggest thing for any religion and for people who like that is the idea of murder. Like, one person is ending another person's life. And for a lot of people, it's like, well, you know, some people would say until it's out of the womb, it's not a life yet. Others would say as soon as it's got that potential of life, then it is, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a thing in biology, as a biologist, there is never a clear cut. I mean, I was surprised when they told us that there's no clear cut what makes a species. I was like, yeah, obviously there is. Two like animals, if they can create a fertile offspring, then it's just, they're the same species. But there's exceptions to all these rules, so there's no way of having that clear divide. This is alive, this is not alive. This creates life, this doesn't. It's so hard. And the problem is people love black and white, but you don't get it.
Yeah, fully. That's always the thing, isn't it? It's like,
it comes into everything. Yeah, absolutely. People want to label people as good or bad, and there's, you know, no one's good, no one's inherently all good or bad. You know, it's like there's a thing we're talking about, like they're talking about like Roald Dahl's anti-Semitism, and should we therefore just, okay, he's a terrible person, burn all his books, you know, let's get rid of him. Or I don't know. I think it's another thing that comes up in a lot of religions, and it's the idea of, you know, you kind of come to the end of your life and you're kind of, the good you've done is weighed up against the bad, and you hope that, you know, the good outweighs the bad, and that's kind of, I don't know, slightly more nuanced way of looking at all that, I think.
Well, imagine a Spartan, right? And this is like, well, the good you've weighed against the bad. So the bad, how much did you steal? It's like, well, I did steal a bit. Fair enough. How good did you do? Well, I killed a lot of people. Very good, well done. Your good definitely outweighs your bad. And he's like, yes, nailed it. Like, I mean, it's subjective, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, personally, I believe with that, if you don't have any thought of a higher authority or being, that morals and ethics don't really count for anything, because it's just more of, there's no substantiation, if you know what I mean. There's things which make
there's
sense.
still objectively good and bad things without.
I don't think there are. Me personally, I don't think there's objective good or bad.
So if you don't believe in God, you think there's no difference between like
Well,
what?
I think there's things which make logical sense and which don't make logical sense. It doesn't mean they're good or bad. It just means they're either positive or negative, but not actually, because I think to have a good or an evil, it's assuming that things should or shouldn't be a certain way. You could say like murder could be not beneficial for the species as a whole. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not beneficial. Yeah, there's, if you know what I mean. This is
Okay,
not about
Alistair?
designing babies, but
No, because no, this does come to.
Yeah, have fun titling this episode, Fred. I'm not sure what you're going to title this episode now. But...
It's good because the key point in really all of this is that I enjoyed the ethics, right? I enjoyed the
Oh, for
ethics
sure.
because it has different branches of if we feel like this is something we should do, if this is something that we should aim, like push more of, or something that we should hold back on. But ethics is really important because if you go back to the key points of ethics, if one side, if both of you both say that yes, we should be pushing this, but one of you is saying, well, I don't believe there is an ethics behind it all. I think there's no such thing as ethics. And the other is saying there is ethics and this ties in with it. Then there's a discussion here. Alistair, tell us.
I think one thing that's actually really interesting, again, it's come up in my research for it, is obviously the legality of it. So there's already laws in place about it. So like you're legally not allowed to do there's the three kinds, and let's get into the technicality of it. But yeah, basically, there are already laws governing what you can and can't do with this, and then obviously where you draw the line with ethics and laws, obviously, I think that is the two are like very 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 clearly linked.
Well, do you mind? Do you have a quick way of? Because I'm curious. I'd like to hear what your point is for there is such thing as morals and ethics.
Quickly before, I'll definitely say more of my argument is against naturalism than it is for a lot of others. So I don't know necessarily others. So usually the kind of arguments I'd be against would be naturalism. To say like in naturalism there isn't. I don't believe there's, objective good or bad. It's all subjective because yeah, carry on. If everything's
subjective, but it's subjective to a culture, and it can be subjective to a group of people, so to the point that therefore you have an agreed upon set of ethics. Like, I agree with Freddie. Your example of if you compare it to Spartans or any sort of completely different group of people throughout history, then yeah, of course there's going to be things that you now think are different than they did. But no, I think obviously there's enough people who will, and obviously the people who will decide on where this goes in terms of design of babies and. That we'll have to take into account the ethics and weigh it all up and make these decisions, and then whether or not everyone agrees with them, obviously they won't. But yeah.
Yeah. So a point. Oh, just quickly. So I think from last week you're saying somewhere about sports, somewhere in the room is just a bunch of guys who are deciding whether or not something is or isn't something.
Right.
Yeah. So with the idea against naturalism would be a case of. When it comes to all coincidence, we're just a big rock that happens to have life on it, to be honest. And so therefore there's no, it's like, oh yeah, but that's bad within this community. Yeah, but look at the whole planet. If it got smashed by another asteroid, it doesn't really matter. It just happened. It's not good or bad. It's just some time progressed. The only thing which is a constant is time continues in whatever speed it, depending on what you do. So, but yeah, so that's the thing of being like, it's always, yes, there could be good or evil within a community and a culture, but it's not. It's only subjective. It's never objective because realistically, it's just time is continuing on, and that's all that's actually known for definite. And things happen within that.
Yes.
And therefore, nothing matters. The end.
Yes. Yes.
The search that people often want, and it turns out surprisingly not even everyone wants, which is kind of almost a catch-22, is people love a universal truth. If you can find something that is universal, then you're like, well. Damn, son, like we nailed it. So if you could find a universal, this is bad in all situations forever and a day, like you've nailed it. And the problem is that you don't often have that. Some people would like to argue though that yes, murder is wrong and always will be wrong and blah blah blah. But it's a difficult topic, obviously.
I mean, granted, I'm also.
Again, I think it's what comes up against us is our desire and our how we're always told
boxes.
The stories. We're told that there's good and there's bad, and we always like to have this label, but in reality, that's not even we don't even come close to that. All the people we think are really good will have these parts of them that were really bad, and then and obviously Hitler was a great painter. What can you? It wasn't even that good, I don't think. But anyway,
what I mean? Is that's all right? Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Like Hitler does a speech all about whatever, and if you made one good, like that's quite a good point, completely unrelated to anything. It's like he still made a good point. It's just that they are a terrible person and everything talk about is terrible. But like,
I think that's where you have to have that balancing the kind of the scale. That's why I quite like the scale thing, because obviously, like, so weighing up your good against your bad, because obviously there are people who we can say, yeah, they were a good person. I think there was a funny thing about that. It was like people were asked who would go to heaven, and they were sort of Mother Teresa and Gandhi, people who would be sort of safe bets, you'd think, right? There were sort of
yeah,
7 out of 10 people, but the highest, do you have a guess who you think was the person everyone thought would go to heaven?
David Attenborough.
Nope.
Jesus. It's got to be Jesus.
I mean, yeah, it's got to be Jesus,
No.
isn't it?
Of almost everyone who was asked, apparently the highest scoring thing of who would go to heaven was yourself. Everyone believed that they would go to heaven.
Wow, that's mad. Hero of your own story, right? Jeez.
Wow, that's a pretty good point. Again, you guys have got off on some sexy tangents that I'd like to talk about. I mean, separating art from the artist is something that we can talk about another time, but I find really important.
Yes, that's a good show.
I'm stuck with people often around me myself included, and I'm like, oh no, that's crap because it was made by or that's going to be crap because it has in it. Like, you got to separate that person from it. Potentially, some people say you shouldn't.
It's cancel culture as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to, because I'm the host, so we're going to bring it back to my point. Dizingna babies. Did anyone come across Lulu and Nana from 2018? No, but you can Google it now. So this was the controversial Chinese twins. The scientist, I've got him somewhere. He was doing experiments with men who were HIV positive and women who were not, and he was hoping that he could produce children that were unaffected by the horrible virus HIV. I'm actually trying to remember human immunosuppressant. Can you remember what HIV stands for?
Virus?
AIDS is autoimmunity deficiency syndrome. Right?
Yeah.
HIV is something, I don't know.
Yes. But anyway, so he was doing experiments with this, and obviously then it came out in a conference about genetic modification in children. And wow, were people unhappy with what he did?
You can't just do that. Is it because he just relatively... I'm sure I've heard something else, like a Chinese scientist kind of just doing something and being like, wait a second. Did you just do that?
I mean, it kind of was. I think this might be who you're thinking of. So, yes, it was these twin girls born in 2018 who've been genetically modified as embryos by the Chinese scientist He Jiankui. So I'm so sorry for my pronunciation. So yes, this was, again, like the whole procedure and experiment was all like totally, everyone was up for it. Obviously, the participants and everything. It was not against anyone's will, but obviously everyone was super unhappy when it came to the world stage that this had happened. Mainly because this is one of those things, kind of like, nuclear bombs, where the thing that you've just done doesn't stop after you've done it. Like, the potential knock-on effect can be massive. No one knows. That's the problem. So I don't know if either of you came across this or you've looked at it now.
Well, yes, I have heard it before. But I think the big question of that is like, how accountable are you for your actions in this case? And obviously you'd hope that people like a good example would be like sort of the fathers of AI, if you like, or the parents of AI. How much do they feel that guilt or that burden of the weight of their decisions now and where that's going to go down the line? And obviously you'd hope that the people who make those decisions will have that good conscience and make the right decisions. But obviously there's no whether or not you are that person. It's can only hope.
Yeah, because I think this was, I briefly looked at it, but then it's kind of like I was looking through an article and it's like, oh, this is a cool bit, and it's like, oh, I'm not going to research this because it'll be like a rabbit hole. And yeah, was it that like he tried making more HIV immune kids, and then I think they were more, this is what the thing about knock-on effects is that they were more prone to something else, even like it's like flu virus or something like that. I can't remember. It was something like that. He had an increased immunity to one thing, but a decreased immunity to another.
Well, there was definitely potentials. I don't know about if there was that. It just says, from what I can see, that the possibility of damaging off-target effects has not been satisfactorily explored. There might be more to it, but I just touched on it when I was having a look.
Yeah, I guess that thing as well is like, you don't know what you're doing. And like saying of do you know when you're trying to change genetics and it's like it's just so unknown for us of what affects anything. Even like when these talks about a gay gene or anything like that, it's like no, but you don't get it. There's like genes are so mad. It could seem like something makes sense for one thing, and then it's like nope, not at all. You know, you just can't. Yeah, it's just like a completely different language which people don't understand yet. I guess the word is yet. No idea yet.
Ooh.
Oh,
Well,
he said it.
I mean, Alistair, you mentioned something about accountability, and humans, I think, are famously trash with dealing with the consequences of their actions.
I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, right? And it was like, well,
I mean,
yeah, nice quote, mate, but you did still do it. Yeah, obviously that's the Oppenheimer. Yeah,
not even talk about like, so this is genetic. This is potentially changing the fundamentals of what we are as organisms. I mean, when we created money, we created the whole concept of it, and we had a housing crisis where a bunch of bank people were like, oh yeah, I can make money off selling this and not get into trouble because I'm going to package it like this. And it ruined millions of lives. I think it ruined a lot. Like, I'm talking about the housing crisis, obviously, in 19...
I think money was created pretty quickly before that, right? It was a fairly new concept.
What I'm saying.
No, money was just for houses. It was like, wait,
I'm
I'm okay with trading my fish for whatever, but that house, that needs something else.
All I mean is that no one took the bullet. No one even went to prison for it. Like, that's what I mean. I'm saying we're not accountable for our actions. I'm not.
Yes. I think the problem again when it depends on this. Like we were talking about at the beginning, we see how we brought it back around beautifully. The whole like the scope of it, right? So how individualist you're looking at how on a wider scale. So yeah, when you look at things like that, obviously you can't hold someone accountable for this much wider broader view of it.
Well, a good quote I've heard is no individual raindrop feels responsible for the flood.
Yeah,
and yeah, it's that thing of like, well, no, it wasn't just me. It's like, yeah, but you were a part to play in it. But I guess you could also then say, if you're not with us, you're against us. Or if you're not part of the help, then you're part of the.
All it takes for evil to flourish is for a good man to do nothing.
Yeah. So then again, the accountability means like, well, even if you're not doing something, you're held accountable then.
Okay, last point that I was going to make, I don't know how long I've gone on for this, is the current estimate, I think, if we allow gene editing, we can save 5%, which, think about that, that's a massive number. 5% of children being born from potential genetic defects that they will have to live with for the rest of their life.
And cost the state money, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to how much we have to pay out.
Well, it saves money. That's the thing. It actually saves money.
That's it. So that's why it's a really. I think always a lot of the thing was like, look at England of like they had to introduce a 5p charge for plastic bags, and suddenly the whole of the UK is all eco. It's like, yes, of course I'm not going to use a plastic bag because you're going to get charged 5p, and that's realistically you had the good intention to want to do it, but you're like it's just a bit more whatever, and usually it comes down to a thing of. However good-willed you are, unfortunately, a lot of times people need motivation in another way, and and
it's the incentive. Yeah, it's all about incentives.
Yeah,
everything about that. I think we can go back again to the individualistic and the broader scale. So, and you could look at it as like ask a parent if you do get the choice, would you have a child with this genetic defect or without? No one's ever going to say, yeah, I'll or if we ever got to a stage where people were choosing the defect for some sort of status symbol or whatever, however terrible humanity may be in the future, I don't know, but I think any rational person hopefully would say no, obviously you want that. So whether it's right or wrong, I think on a broader scale it's hard to say, but this one I think is a good example of on the more individuals, basically individuals, it's comes a lot simpler.
I'll come in with a point for the 5%. I guess the biggest thing is that's only a good thing, isn't it? If you're able to just negate 5% of children having a genetic defect. And I guess the only big fear of it is just going into eugenics, which I feel like hypothetically makes sense unless you're killing off people, but more of a, starting afresh, so to speak. But I think it's the biggest thing is where you draw the line, and like the Pandora's box, as with that Chinese scientist, of like you started something, like you've discovered the atomic bomb, for instance, and like it's not a case of well, I don't think atomic bombs good for anything. No, splitting the atom was good for something. But it's like, where does it go? And like, it could be you never have any issues now, but it's the bigger picture of thinking, what are we giving down to future generations, and what's gonna be our mark on the world? It's gonna be for good.
I feel like ever since we decided to domesticate wheat, basically, we've just had the human legacy has just been, let's make a decision that seems good at the time now, and then it has terrible repercussions later down. And guess what? That's the generation's problem. So they can work it out, and they'll make their own mistakes and make it even worse until we eventually no longer exist.
I think my biggest thing is not.
I can't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, because like for me, during uni, when I was in Chester, I had alarms for everything because I knew I couldn't trust myself to do. I had alarms to wake up, to eat my breakfast, to play Xbox, to study, walk the dogs, because I knew I just couldn't trust myself to do that. I have the best will in the world, and I think it's the same thing of the thing that you pass on down, just to be aware that like, the best will in the world, it may not, like, oh, they should only use this for good. But as you say, Alistair, track record isn't too good.
Well, I mean, that's actually a quote from someone during, I think, when they were talking about the potential violated ethical guidelines of science with the Lulu and Nana in 2018. I think someone said that it was a wrong turn down the right path.
I like that.
Sums up what you're saying is that yes, like you mean well, but you don't know.
But it's also the thing of like, does it mean you stop doing anything just for the fear of what could be, but it's so it's, how do you check yourself for progression? And again, the longer it goes on, the more people are okay with it. It just becomes common life, and then it's a case of then you go back onto it, or what constitutes good or bad. It could be in the future everyone's got like, I don't know, crazy massive eyes and wings, and it's like people would now be like, that's not right, you shouldn't be doing that to our genetics. But it's like, but why is it that you decided what was right or wrong and we have to follow it? And then it goes back to is objective good or bad, or like right or wrong, objective truth, isn't it?
I mean, tying your point and Alice's point together, we do look different from our ancestors because we domesticated wheat. We look different because of the practices of farming. We're massive.
Yeah.
I feel like like you said, we're kind of currently cyborgs, right? The reliance we have on technology already. Obviously, you can put your phone down, but if you went a day without your phone, you'd really notice. You're dependent on that in a way that
I love
past previous generations weren't. So I think when you can look at all those things, we're massively changing, and it's only when if you look back as far as obviously us, the domestication of wheat, that's a good example. But I can't see it changing anytime soon, and you just have to kind of hope we're along for the ride and see where it takes us.
I love the idea of like cyborgs, because like you can put your phone down, but for the rest of your life, like no, you need it to function nowadays. And people can say, oh, well, you don't actually need it. Like, yeah, but not for the society that we live in now. That's why
if I want my job, then I'd need my phone. It's a 1 + 1 = 2. I can't do my job without a phone. So can I survive without it? I mean, technically or realistically, where are you going?
Yeah.
Can you thrive without it?
So one negative thing I'll talk about first, or potential negative, how you see it. There is an IAMA on Reddit from a survivor sibling.
Oh.
If anyone's interested, please do go and give it a little bit of a read. It was written 6 years ago. And
I feel like you need to just do it, Freddie.
The TLDR?
I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's just the sad point is that this is someone whose older brother had leukemia. Their parents couldn't find a sound option for a bone marrow donor, so they conceived the person who wrote this through IVF solely for the purpose of donation. The older brother died a few years ago when the writer was 16 and he was 21. But prior to that, they had donated blood and bone marrow many times. And sadly, the parents did not seem to treat the secondary sibling that well. They weren't that happy with them, and they kind of blamed them a bit. It's quite a negative
That's
story,
the
and I
flip
just
side of the
wanted
coin,
to
right?
I wanted to just remind you guys that there is the negative. Yeah.
The story that I started with is the positive side of it, and then that's the flip side of that coin.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's to the parents. It's not the thing that happened. It's how people react to it.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah. So obviously, I think something that I forget anyway is that there's positive and negative, short, small term, like small vision, like with individual cases, and then you have large view, positive and negative, right? So I mean, you could even have small view positive. Oh wow, everyone's getting healthier. Large view negative. Turns out we're all infertile 2,000 years later. Like you just don't know how it goes. So yeah, tying it together. Do you mind if I finish off? I have
That sounds great.
obviously I have to finish off with: will you or would you, if offered, screen your genetic material to check you're not passing it on to your children? And how might this affect your choices of having kids in the future? Minus you, Johnny, who already has a kid.
Well, we already do technically. Like Ezra is screened for like Down syndrome and different like genetic diseases already, just when they're in the womb. The harder thing is it's easier to choose an embryo which does or doesn't have it. It's a much harder decision to choose whether or not you abort a baby based on a screening. But yes, it already happens now. You get screening for stuff like that. So again, you could say just quite commonplace. And I've got 23andMe, so I actually know a little bit about my genetics.
I never realized you did the 23andMe. Oh. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Alistair?
I think I would for sure. I just look at it as, I mean, in the same way that when you're the age at which you're choosing to have kids, I think that's just an extrapolation of this, of the same principle. Basically, it's you want to give your child the best life you can, and I believe that is one way to do it and give them a better life. So yeah.
So is it better to have a kid who will have a more normal, I guess, inverted commas, life?
I just think that I've had the chance to live a really great life and be a really healthy, happy person. I want to have that for the same, based on my personal experience of that. I think that would be
this guy showing off.
Kill his health and happiness.
Oh man, yeah, can we all? Totally, we all do have that.
But what if we all did a 23andMe and had a screen when it's just a normal thing when you're born, and then it's like, all right, you're a carrier for this, and you're not a carrier for this, so cool. Just watch out.
I told you the story about the people who they were both a carrier for a really rare genetic disorder and they had the two kids. Could you imagine of like everyone just as a standard screening, you get 23andMe when you're a kid, when you're a baby, and when you're growing up, you compare things. So rather than actually choosing, like, no, everyone's allowed to have kids naturally, but to make sure we don't have those genetic defects, you're not allowed to have kids with somebody who is also a carrier. That's like, it becomes a law or something, because that means when you give if somebody like has sex when they've got AIDS and they don't tell somebody and they know that they have it, that's kind of like, I can't remember the term, not manslaughter.
Illegal.
Yeah, illegal, like that. Well, there you go. Yeah. So like that. So could you imagine you fall in love with somebody and then you find out, no, you're not allowed to have kids. You're allowed to be married.
This is modern day Romeo and Juliet, if ever.
Yeah. So it'd be like that idea, like you can't. There's some people you could never marry because you're not allowed to have kids with them. Or if you do get married, so you have to become infertile. Like, no, you're not allowed to have kids.
Well, you can have kids with someone else.
Yeah.
Hope your wife's cool with
it. By the way, honey, here's a baby. Is that cool?
But to extrapolate that even further, what do you guys think about the government say sterilizing everybody at birth, and then you have to sort of pass a test to be able to have a kid? Or what do you guys think of that?
Yeah.
Wow, I'd never heard of that. That sounds hilarious as a book.
Just like the dick box.
It might obviously a government having that level of control over people's bodies was completely, this is exactly what the Chinese government did with the one-child policy, and obviously it had dramatic effects on dramatic negative effects on a very wider scale, and but yeah, I mean, what do you guys think of it in terms of a body deciding what people do with their bodies? Is that
should
that be everyone's right? Do you have a right to have kids, or because obviously you see people you maybe aren't the best parents in the world, and you think, oh well, should they have been able to have kids? Obviously a good argument for them, it's a human right and everything, but I don't know. Where do you guys stand on that?
There's a charity in America, and I'm pretty sure I'll have to double check. that they pay something like $300 to drug addicts to effectively become infertile. So it's kind of saying like, we're going to give you money and you can come clean, but until then, just make sure you're not going to have kids, because it's effectively not fair on the kids. And you could say in turn, it's just, just more money coming out in like kids going into this.
I feel like a lot of
system.
people, a lot of people would say that they are ethically right, but then
because someone's taking that
The
choice.
Handmaid's Tale, that they would be considered the most heinous. That'd be the most heinous crime, like to stop the birth of super pro-life movements. Right? So it's an interesting one. Yeah.
Man, you've given me another thought experiment now. What if at, let's say, 18, whenever your country assumes that you have full or autonomous control of your own body and life, they offer you money because the world's overpopulated to not have to sterilize yourself. They're just like, oh, would you like to be sterile? And you're like, yeah, all right. I mean,
we keep finding there's about 30 to 40. Everyone becomes really depressed. Just,
the buzz of buying those, buying that new laptop and car when you're 18, it's worn off by the time you're 40, and you wish you did. Yeah.
Suddenly, car insurance goes down for boys somehow. Well, yeah, I did about
I do like that. Yeah.
That's a really good thought experiment that I'm going to have to think about, but I guess I'm against it only because it's still people who have their horrible biases who are deciding what it takes to be allowed to not be sterile. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you could just have a few bad eggs in there with way too much power, and you have just wiped out a whole lot of diversity.
Yeah. I mean,
it's also be really interesting about how the amount of money they offer for that. I think in terms of how the economics of that. I mean, that's again a whole other thing. But the economics of that, I think, would be fascinating. To see what people would actually do. I don't know. That's really
economophile.
What?
Okay.
Well, you'd have breeders and business. Well, do you like workers and breeders effectively, wouldn't you? It's like, well, no, I sterilize myself. If you're 18, you choose to sterilize yourself, you get a big burst of money and say a career or whatever. And it's like you have the breeders and you have the workers. That idea, how cool that? Not how cool, but that idea of a story where you have like complete two different sects of society. One progresses the society further. One produces the society. If you know what I mean.
And then there's a third smaller sector for everyone's entertainment, which is the sport people. And the sport people, like, they work for your entertainment, but they breed so that they may produce more sporty people.
Are we just living in Freddy's utopia where everyone's really fit and loves the sport and has pretty babies? I can think of worse places to live, to be fair. But
well, to sign off, would you guys like to mention anything more about genetics?
I think that's a great place to end. I think Freddy's utopia. Let's go.
Well, I hope that everyone listening, if you do decide that you want to have children, that you make your decisions with a little tiny bit more knowledge that we made.
That's what we were going for this episode, for sure.
Yeah, of course. I just want people to be just a tiny bit wiser, like hopefully than we are.
That's the dream. That's the dream.
So to finish off, that's bye from me for this week. Bye from Johnny and bye from Alistair, and we'll see you next time.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and has actually made it to the end, please consider following us on Instagram at No Idea Yet Podcast. And if you have any ideas of topics that we could talk about, feel free to either message us there or send us an email at noideayetpodcast@gmail.com.